June 2018, I visited several Balkan countries along the Adriatic Mediterranean coast. It was part of a 10-day group tour organized by Go Ahead, a company with whom I had previously traveled frequently. The 6 socialist republics that constituted the former Yugoslavia broke apart in the early 1990s. After several years of intense warfare, they went their separate ways as independent countries, some joining the European Union and even NATO. The tour began in the very southern tip of Croatia, one of the oddest-shaped countries in the world. Our first stop was the Croatian city of Dubrovnik, a uniquely picturesque walled city of some 40,000 people. The historic old town is completely surrounded by medieval walls and towers, most of which date back 600 years. Built mainly during the 12th to 17th centuries, the massive stone walls are between 12 and 20 feet thick. Dubrovnik boasts one of the greatest intact medieval fortification systems, which was never breached by any hostile army. The complex double-wall structure extends for more than a mile and is reinforced by dozens of towers, bastions, and forts. For centuries during the Middle Ages, Dubrovnik, known then as Ragusa, played a major role as a wealthy, independent trading power. The Republic of Ragusa served as a vital link between the 2 major Adriatic powers, the Italian Republic of Venice and the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Following the discovery of new trade routes, Ragusa's gradual decline was hastened by a major earthquake in 1667, which destroyed much of the city and killed thousands of its inhabitants. In the early 19th century, the city was conquered by the French army and thereafter lost its independence. After Napoleon's defeat a few years later, Dubrovnik and much of the other Balkan lands came under the rule of the Austro-Hungarian Empire until its dissolution at the end of World War I. The brief period of Yugoslav independence ended with German and Italian occupation in 1941. With the aid of Soviet troops, the Communist Party assumed power at the end of World War II. Croatia became part of a unified Yugoslavia. When European communism crumbled at the end of the Cold War, the predominantly Catholic Republic of Croatia declared its independence in 1991, leading to a period of intense warfare with its Balkan neighbors. Dubrovnik's mild weather and its historic charm make it a popular stop for Mediterranean cruise ships, each carrying thousands of passengers. They bring over 1 million tourists a year to the city. These visitors, like myself, spend only part of a day strolling through the medieval streets. We usually buy just a lunch and maybe a few souvenirs before leaving behind our garbage and moving on to the next destination. Mass tourism is definitely threatening to overwhelm Dubrovnik's fragile historic infrastructure, as it is in Venice, Amsterdam, and many other tourist destinations across the planet. Unlike these larger cities, Dubrovnik's old town is almost 100% devoted to tourism. Hardly any locals live here anymore, since every square inch of real estate is used to make money from foreign visitors. Regular stores for locals have given way to tourist restaurants, cafes, ice cream parlors, and souvenir shops. Dubrovnik was the location for shooting some memorable scenes for HBO's blockbuster series Game of Thrones. Now there are popular Game of Thrones tours which enable thousands of fans from around the world to take selfies in front of familiar stone walls or staircases that were featured in the TV drama. Walking through this picturesque city with hordes of tourists, I couldn't stop feeling like being in a theme park, some Mediterranean Disneyland or Magic Kingdom. It's not surprising to learn that both Disney and HBO have served as consultants to promote tourism to Dubrovnik. In recent years, the city has taken some steps to manage the tourist onslaught by scheduling the arrival of tourist buses and cruise ships more evenly throughout the day. However, it seems likely that for the foreseeable future, the old walled city of Dubrovnik will remain a historic site inhabited almost exclusively by transient foreign tourists.
They time it to music on all the birthdays.
They had fireworks going up every...
Ma due occhi che ti guardano così vicini.
On the second day of our tour, we visited Montenegro, a tiny country about the size of Connecticut, with a population of barely 600,000. We spent most of our time leisurely circling around the Bay of Kotor, just a short drive south of Dubrovnik along the Adriatic coast. Due to its dramatic mountain scenery, in spots the bay resembles a Norwegian fjord, including the occasional cruise ship. Most of the country is mountainous and contains 5 national parks, some with wolves and bears. Tourism plays an increasing role in the country's economy. The government has undertaken a major campaign to attract visitors not just to Montenegro's mountains, but also to its beaches, its nightlife, Orthodox monasteries, and other historic sites. Efforts to expand tourism were reflected in the many construction and renovation projects that can be seen along the bay. A popular historic site in the Bay of Kotor is an artificial island with a Catholic church named Our Lady of the Rocks. The island originally was just a pile of rocks where, according to legend, 2 brothers saw an image of the Virgin Mary back in 1452. Later, the island was expanded by dumping rocks from the mainland and sinking old or captured ships full of rocks. The current island church dates from the early 18th century. It contains an impressive marble altar and an unusual collection of silver votive tablets. The custom of throwing rocks into the water continues to the present. Every year on July 22nd, residents go out on their boats and throw rocks into the water, thereby gradually expanding the island. The city of Kotor is one of the best preserved medieval fortified towns in the Mediterranean. First mentioned over 2,000 years ago as a Roman settlement, in the Middle Ages the city became heavily fortified by a 3-mile-long wall. Nearly 4 centuries of Venetian rule began in the early 15th century. The typical Venetian architecture can still be seen throughout much of the city today. The Catholic Cathedral in Kotor is one of only 2 in the country. Consecrated in 1166, it was severely damaged and rebuilt following several major earthquakes. Montenegro was a kingdom for much of its 1,000-year history. Following the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s, a close referendum in 2006 gave Montenegro its independence from Serbia by less than 3,000 votes. Most of the population remains predominantly Eastern Orthodox, as it has been for centuries. Tivat bears no resemblance to anywhere else in Montenegro. It's more like the French Riviera without the crowds. This haven for the super wealthy was developed by a Canadian billionaire and is now owned by the Emirate of Dubai. In 2017, Montenegro became the newest member of NATO. Although it has applied for membership in the European Union, Montenegro is not expected to be admitted until 2025. On the third day of our tour, we visited the city of Mostar in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Like its neighbors, this country is home to diverse ethnicities. A slim majority are Muslim Bosniaks, followed by Eastern Orthodox Serbs and Catholic Croats. Bosnia-Herzegovina is one of the former Yugoslav republics that proclaimed its independence in 1992. This decisive step was followed by the brutal Bosnian War, which lasted for 3 years. The ferocious war is known for its widespread atrocities, ethnic cleansing, and genocidal war crimes against civilians, which had not been seen in Europe since the end of World War II. Before the war concluded with the Dayton Agreement in 1995, it had resulted in the killing of about 100,000 persons, mainly Muslims. Our local guide was a Muslim feminist who talked frankly about the difficulties of living in this economically challenged, multi-ethnic country. The most remarkable places she showed us were a mosque and the former home of a local businessman. Mostar is the 5th largest city in the country. Its most famous landmark is Stari Most, the old bridge connecting the two halves of the city. This beautifully arched stone bridge was built in 1566. It stood for 427 years until it was deliberately destroyed by Croat military forces during the Bosnian War in 1993. It was rebuilt 10 years later with aid from around the world, using some of the original stones recovered from the river below. I wish we could have seen more of this fascinating country, especially some of the less touristy medieval villages and the capital, Sarajevo, where the assassination of the Austrian crown prince by a Serbian nationalist led to the outbreak of World War I a century ago.
And then a golden chain here with golden money on forehead to show how much money they had, and like a decoration, because they had this tradition, in my opinion, stupid tradition.
After a 100-mile bus ride up the Dalmatian coast, we arrived in the Croatian city of Split. On our first stroll down the waterfront promenade, we saw what's left of the ancient Diocletian Palace, which extends for many blocks. The upper floors contrast with the modern stores built into the street level of this huge structure. Following an alleyway into the enormous complex itself, we discovered many more ruins in a variety of architectural styles, including Roman, Neoclassical, and Venetian.
Don't overdo, I do see myself in the mirror. But thank you. Kind of you.
Our 4th day began with a visit to the Ivan Mestrovich Gallery in Split. The imposing building and grounds were based on plans designed by the sculptor himself. During the 1930s, this was his family home and studio space. The museum today preserves and exhibits hundreds of the artist's sculptures, drawings, and paintings. The seaside palace in Split was built of limestone and marble for the Roman Emperor Diocletian in the style of a huge fort. It was completed in the year 305 AD. Today it is treasured as the world's most complete remains of a Roman palace. The original vaulted stonework can be seen in the subterranean portions underneath the palace. Much of this area contained garbage and refuse dumped over the centuries and is still in the process of being excavated. Over the past 17 centuries, much has been added or destroyed, but much still remains. Today there are hundreds of buildings inside the sprawling complex, where up to 10,000 people have lived at any one time. The imperial apartments were separated from the rest of the complex by a monumental court, which was fronted by several temples. Diocletian's mausoleum has long since been replaced by the Cathedral of St. Domnius. The palace was originally decorated with a number of 3,500-year-old Egyptian granite sphinxes, only 2 of which still remain at the site. I could easily have spent more time exploring the many alleys and passageways in this Diocletian palace complex. It's very unusual to see so many styles and architectural periods represented in close proximity to one another. Almost half of Split's entire historic old town was built inside the fortified walls of this amazing place. The Museum of Fine Arts relocated in 2009 into the old hospital building in Split. It was founded a century ago and focuses on Croatian and international artists from the 14th century to the present. Stray cats are common here, where they are regularly fed by local cat lovers. The Laško Challenge was a huge ad campaign by Slovenia's most popular brand of beer. It launched a contest between 3 pop megastars, a Serb, a Bosnian, and a Croat. The public could help select the winner by voting electronically. One citizen in each of these Baltic countries won a refrigerator full of beer. For those who had lived through devastating warfare less than 2 decades ago, the clear message was that everyone wins by drinking beer and making music, not war. On the 5th day of our tour, we visited 2 historic cities on the Dalmatian coast. The first was Trogir, considered to be the best preserved Romanesque Gothic complex in all of Central Europe. Originally founded by Greek colonists in the 3rd century BC, it contains a number of well-preserved sites dating back more than 2,000 years, including some beautiful Romanesque, Gothic, and Venetian architecture. The city's historic core has about 10 churches from the 13th century. The massive fortress was built under Venetian administration during the 15th century and still serves as a popular site for musical and theatrical performances. The second stop of the day was in Zadar, the oldest continuously inhabited city in Croatia. Among Zadar's more unusual attractions is a sea organ located under a set of marble steps along the shoreline. Eerie sounds are produced by sea waves pushing air through underground tubes. Zadar was under Roman rule for several hundred years, beginning in the 1st century BC. It developed the typical Roman street system with a rectangular street plan, a central forum, thermal baths, a sewage and water supply system from a 25-mile-long aqueduct. The largest Roman forum on the eastern Adriatic is in Zadar. This was a central marketplace where much of the city's public business took place. Although human habitation here dates back to the Stone Age, the city was founded in the 9th century BC by Liburnians. They were a seafaring people who traded with ancient Greeks, Etruscans, and Phoenicians. Today, Zadar is the main political, cultural, commercial, industrial, and educational center in the region. Its university dates back to the 14th century. Our 6th day was spent exploring the beautiful Plitvice Lakes National Park, one of the oldest and largest in Croatia. The main attractions in this 73,000-acre park are the spectacular clusters of waterfalls along the 16 lakes. The colors of these lakes range from green to gray or blue, depending on the local mineral composition and the time of day. A distinctive feature of these lakes is that they are not separate or stationary bodies of water, but are all part of one constantly changing, interconnected system of lakes. They're formed by runoff from the nearby mountains and are all connected by above-ground and subterranean rivers. As a result of continuous sedimentation and erosion, new waterfalls are being formed while others run dry. We were able to see only a small portion of the diverse flora and fauna that thrive in this secluded park, which is home to a great number of brown bears, wolves, lynx, eagles, and owls, as well as hundreds of different species of birds, bats, butterflies, and fish. We stayed in the Jezero, a popular 3-star hotel located inside the national park. In addition to providing hearty meals, its amenities include a cozy bar and a spa with inexpensive massages. The colorful signage explaining the audio alert signals was certainly quite detailed. We spent the 7th day of our Balkan tour exploring Zagreb, Croatia's capital city. With nearly 1 million inhabitants, Zagreb is distinguished by its many 18th and 19th century buildings, featuring splendid examples of Austro-Hungarian architecture. In addition to rail lines reaching the outer suburbs, Zagreb has a municipal tram network that dates back to the 1890s. These modern tram coaches are all made in Zagreb. Mirogoj Cemetery is among Zagreb's more attractive landmarks. Unlike most other denominational cemeteries that belong to a church, this one was built by the city in the late 19th century and accepts members of any or no faith. Among the notable graves here is that of Franjo Tuđman, who served as the first president of Croatia following its independence from Yugoslavia in 1990 until his death in 1999. Like any large city, Zagreb has its share of urban grit, along with new modern buildings and a number of beautifully preserved historic sections. St. Mark's Church dates back to the 13th century. It's next to Croatia's parliament, its constitutional court, and Zagreb's old city hall. The Croatian Museum of Naive Art focuses primarily on Croatian artists whose artwork is often labeled naive or primitive. The Zagreb City Council reflects the Balkanization of the region's political landscape. Among its 51 elected members, there are 17 different political parties represented, along with 9 independents. The shortest and steepest funicular in the world connects the lower part of Zagreb with the upper town. It was originally powered by a steam engine when it opened in 1890. central market sells just about everything in the way of food, flowers, toys, and clothing. Zagreb's Catholic Cathedral, the tallest building in Croatia, was built 800 years ago. When the Ottoman Empire invaded in the 15th century, fortification walls were built to protect the cathedral, some of which still remain. A number of notable Croatian clergy, heroes, and martyrs are buried here. This Serbian Orthodox cathedral was built at the end of the 19th century. Although Eastern Orthodox Christians are the second largest religious denomination in the country, they comprise barely 4% of the total Croatian population. While we had only one day here, Zagreb definitely felt like a fun city. The historic seaside resorts we had previously visited depend on daily shiploads and busloads of tourists, but Zagreb is quite different. It's not just the seat of the national government, it's also Croatia's center of finance, industry, publishing, education, research, music, the arts, and culture. Our tour just scratched the surface. There's so much going on here that it would be well worth spending more time to explore. On the 8th day of our Balkan tour, we explored the lovely city of Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia. Our tour planners had wisely saved the best for last. Although it's the largest city in the country, it doesn't feel overwhelming. Ljubljana's total population is less than 300,000, a quarter of whom are university students. The center of town is spread across the Ljubljanica River, with more than a dozen bridges connecting the two sides. A medieval castle is perched on a hill overlooking the city. Much of the city's commercial and social life takes place along the edge of the river, where literally thousands of people fill the many restaurants and pubs at all hours of the day and night. Ever since the Middle Ages, Ljubljana was ruled by Austria from the 14th to the 20th century. Many of the city's most beautiful buildings date from the late 19th century, when Ljubljana was extensively rebuilt following a devastating earthquake. The bronze doors commemorate the visit here of Pope John Paul II to mark 1250 years of Christianity in Slovenia. The current Baroque cathedral was completed in the early 18th century. The lively central market offers the usual flowers and food, including a First Lady pie honoring Melania Trump, currently the most famous person from Slovenia. Unlike most other places on our Balkan tour, this city feels relaxed, sophisticated, and prosperous. Being a landlocked city, Ljubljana does not have the mixed blessing of dealing with cruise ships and their thousands of day trippers. Due to its central location and unique history, Ljubljana embodies the confluence of various Slavic, Mediterranean, and Germanic cultures. Now that it's no longer part of any large Roman, Austro-Hungarian, Nazi, or Communist empire, the city basks in its current popularity with a hip, cosmopolitan flair. The Julian Alp region, some 40 miles northwest of Ljubljana, is a popular destination for both Slovenian and foreign visitors. Alpine scenery with picturesque village churches and mountain lakes is quite spectacular. These boats with their colorful awnings resemble Venetian gondolas and carry passengers to sites around Lake Bled. Bled Castle, first mentioned over 1,000 years ago, is the oldest one in Slovenia. Back in Ljubljana, the outdoor nightlife was in full swing. On the ninth and last full day of our tour, we visited the 15-mile-long Postojna cave in southwestern Slovenia. First described in the 17th century, it actually has some graffiti dating back to 1213. This karst cave system has been a major tourist attraction since it opened to the public in 1884 with the world's first cave train for tourists. The cave is home to the Olm, a cave-dwelling amphibian that can live in total darkness for 100 years. They can grow to 40 centimeters in length and survive without food for 10 years. 5 miles from the Postojna cave is Predjama Castle, built into the mouth of another cave for maximum protection. The most infamous owner of the original castle was the knight Erasmus of Lug, a notorious 15th century robber baron. When he killed the commander of the Habsburg imperial army, Erasmus provoked the wrath of Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III. After a long siege during which Erasmus continued to resupply himself using hidden cave tunnels, he was killed and his castle destroyed in 1484. The current castle dates from the 16th century and is the third one to be located here. There was much to reflect on at the end of our tour. We had visited 4 newly independent Balkan countries that had been ruled by foreign empires for centuries. While they finally gained their freedom, they still rely heavily on international organizations like the European Union and NATO for financial credit and national security. They also need millions of foreign tourists to provide them with steady jobs. The future is bright if they can continue celebrating their differences with music and beer instead of waging war.
Thank you. What's your name? Your name? Name. Matez? And your name? Mitya. Okay, thanks a lot. And what village you come from? Where? In Slovenia. Where? Srengradec. Okay.